cold night, what is better than to sit and have a nice little intimate conversation about what we love and the passions and as we're getting going here, I kind of want to talk about the inception of this talk, which is, I'm so glad that, so many of us are fans. And we kind of, we sat there and we said, what do you want to talk about? And he goes, you know what? I truly believe that the next amazing photographer is going to be in this room tonight. There is this wonderful feeling that someone in that room is going to be the next, amazing, talented person to really kind of change the world. We just wanted to have an intimate conversation, and that word "intimate" got really kind of confused. Like, oh, is it just 5 people, or is it no? It was the topics and the honesty in which we were going to have this conversation tonight was what was so important to us. This wonderful collection of photographers and people that love photography and and I'm going to ask you this at the end. I ask this question to every single person I interview and talk with, is what is photography to you? So I want you to think about that. But I think all of us, deep in our heart, it's so important that just, there's things in our lives, music, passions, and, images and moments, and photography feeds all of us. It's one of those magic things that, when people say what inspires you, is that moment where you look at something and you have a shared experience and it affects us all in different ways. And that's what the beauty of photography is to me. I'll introduce myself. I'm Travis Keys. I'm chairman of APA, which is American Photographic Artists, New York. We are an organization that we're there to inspire, protect, serve professional photographers, providing them the best tools for professional success. And honestly, what is the heart and makes APA different is we're here to make real life connections and support one another. And that's what makes APA so different, is we want to provide you with the right tools, but we want to have people there that care about people. And that's what's so important to us. So tonight is a little different. And I tried to explain that. And the basis was to ask you to really ask questions, and for us to use that as a blueprint to really have this dialogue tonight. And we got a lot of written questions in, but amazingly enough, no one was brave enough to say, hey, I'd like to raise my hand and turn on my camera and ask that question live. We're still going to let you do that. And there's a Q&A panel. Even if you don't want to be on camera, please use that Q&A panel. So if there are, topics or things that you want to follow up, we will watch that panel and use that as well. I want to first and foremost say thank you for joining us tonight. There are very few people that I think kind of paved the way for me in terms of a visual mentor, someone that inspired me. You are one of them. And for some reason, I think early on, I understand that the way you photograph had a certain amount of empathy in everything you did. And it wasn't so much that you were a photographer, is that you were capturing people and truly emotions and going after their soul essence in a way that it transcended the photo. And they say that doorway to the soul is through the eyes. Somehow Platon found a master key to unlock that. And without further ado, I want to say hello and welcome. Join us tonight.
It's great to be here. Thank you for joining us, to all of you. I would amplify what you were saying to all our friends tuning in, that just let it all go, man. Let all those anxieties about performing or being criticized or daring to try something. Just join us. If you got a question, be human. I'm just a human being. There's, we're all people together. I'm here for you. I'm not here for me. I'm skipping dinner to be here because I love you guys, and I want to encourage you all to be great. So if you've got any questions, don't be filled with regret afterwards and say, oh, I wish I'd spoken to him. Just join us. You're so welcome. I actually want you to ask questions. I'm going to be very nice, I promise. And we can have a good chat, a good conversation. And if you've got anything that you want to know, ask it. I mean, when I was a student, I was so hungry for information. I felt that I'm not getting it where I should be getting it from. So there was this burning desire to look for answers. And I'm still kind of in that mindset even today. I'm still trying to find solutions and answers for things, because we're all searching for something. So you're supposed to be asking questions. You're supposed to be, daring to reach out that's your job as a photographer. So I really want to see some faces today, and I'll be sad if you
Well,
didn't.
luckily, we've already had a couple say yes, so that's a really good
Great.
thing.
That's fantastic. That's a good sign. Come on,
So
folks.
I
Let's
know
stir up the
I'm
world.
psyched about this. So let's kick it off. I want to talk about photographers. Basically, what we do is see, and sight is so important. And I want to talk about something that we share in common. That when someone tells you you have it, you can't see it, and how that affects you. Both of us have dyslexia. And when someone tells you you have something that you can't see, it's not a scar, it's not a bruise, it's not something, it's something internal, and they're telling you you see and interpret things differently. How did that first influence you, and have you found it influence you as a photographer?
Well, it's you know, here's a story. When Pussy Riot were arrested and by the powers that be in Russia for demonstrating for women's rights, for LGBTQ rights, and fighting against excessive nationalism, um, they were put on trial. And at the trial, uh, Nadia Tolokonikova, who is their founder, she's become a friend of mine. She stood up during her closing statement, which I might refer back to later, by the way. And she said something amazing. She said, "It's not us that's being judged here, it's you." She said, you all think, she was talking to the judge and beyond the judge. She said, you all think that you're judging us as a group of young women for fighting for people's rights. She said, you're fundamentally wrong. It's you that's being judged. You're being judged by history. You get a chance to do whatever you want to do. And if you're going to put us in jail, then there's a bigger judge than you and me. The biggest judge is history. So I heard that. And when Nadia told me that, I kind of thought, that's just amazing, isn't it? And then if you look back at where we're all at all the time in society, we're all constantly being judged, and we are part of the problem because we are judging other people too. We're judging each other. And I think we should be more curious and less judgmental. And most of my work is about that very concept of not placing judgments. So if you're asking about something like dyslexia, who is to say it's a flaw? It's a very interesting concept. And who makes that judgment? I think everyone is completely unique, beautifully so. And we all have strengths and we all have vulnerabilities. That's what it is to be human. And yet there are these sort of filters built, constructed in society that we all have to move through. And the filters don't always recognize people's greatness. The filters just mean that if you are not like a set of criteria, if you don't fit into a set of criteria that someone created, then somehow you are to be judged or you are regarded as lesser than. And if you're a creative person, then it's your job to think differently and feel differently. That's our job. And to record our emotions and document them, whether it's in music, whether it's in art, whether it's in any kind of creative field, and dare to put out your feelings. And when it's good art, it's good because other people see themselves in that struggle, and other people see themselves in those emotions that we put down through our art. That's a beautiful thing. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And when you're talking about dyslexia means that you find it difficult to make sense of lots of bits of information. Sometimes people say it's about processing information. Sometimes it's just lots of pieces of information on a page. I find it very difficult to look at a complicated world. So it's in my nature to simplify things, tidy them up, so that I can then take that information and take it deep into my mind and in my heart so that I really understand it. I'm not skimming off the top and speed reading with it. I'm actually trying to find a way to get it deep into my heart. And if I can do that, then it creates a sense of connection with this information that is 100% solid.
Yeah.
Now, I call dyslexia a gift because I've spent my life simplifying a complicated world. When you look at one of my pictures, it's simple and it's bold. And I'm saying I'm looking at all this information that's very messy, and I'm trying to figure out which part of all that information is the most important part so I can relate to it. And so it's just natural. I'm going to tidy it up. If there are drapes in the background, I'm going to take them away unless they're relevant to the person, unless they're relevant to the experience I'm having. So for me, it really is about tidying the world up and simplifying it so I can get it. But by doing that, often my pictures stand out as a bold, simple statement in a very complicated world. So, I mean, it was a nightmare going through school. It's actually liberation. And you just have to be strong enough to get through those filters where people judge you because you are somehow different.
Yeah.
Different is good. If you're
Yeah.
going to be a photographer, you better be different. And if you are different, you've got to celebrate that, and put it to work. And I call it as deployment of your tools. All right. It's almost like a military exercise
Yeah.
of acknowledging who you are, how you feel, what are your strengths, what are your vulnerabilities, and then you deploy them as tools of creativity to transform the world. That's an interesting job.
Yeah. To go into, you brought up school just briefly. If we were looking at that wonderful John Hughes movie, what group did you hang with? Were you with the jocks or the misfits or it's like what, and was school difficult for you? And when did you figure out, A, they're treating me differently because I have dyslexia, and B, I'm on a route to become a photographer.
School was difficult, but I'm a kind of happy person. Like I mean, we all go through hard times, and all of us have, all of us will. You can't avoid that. But I am an optimist. I always have been. Um, I have my down times, and I'm happy to talk about that because that's a big part of dealing with challenges in life, especially if you're a photographer. You're going to face a lot of challenges and a lot of opposition. But generally, I was always optimistic. School was a struggle because I wasn't cool at school. I'm short. I was not great at academia at all because of this. So I kind of got through it all okay, but I had to work 6 times as hard as everyone else to make the grade. But when I went to art school, I was suddenly surrounded by people who were equally as odd as I was.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful experience because we were all in it together, and they had all been through something similar, even though we were all different. And to be in a place, and I was very privileged. I went to St. Martin's, which is arguably one of the greatest art colleges in the world. It's changed names now and morphed, but in those days, this is the art college where so many brilliant people went who were in fashion, were in art, in design. And it was also brewing up, the end of the 80s. We were all sick and tired of excess, glamour, fame. We were all poor. We didn't know anyone famous. It's always raining in London. There was a recession going on. So we were all like kind of tough, militant, hardcore, right? We loved life. We were in the pub, so many nights, drinking, debating, dancing. It was just working our asses off. It was full on. And it was the seeds of what would become the swinging 90s a few years later in London, because I was at college with so many really creative people who were also at college at the same time. And we were all unknown, we were all struggling, we were all doing our thing, but we all went on to do something interesting and cross-fertilize with different disciplines. So people like Alexander McQueen, in the fashion world, we all went to the same art college. Philip Tracy, went to the Royal College of Art, where I went after St. Martin's to do my master's. So many fascinating people, and I'm sure I learned more from that than I did from my teachers, just being around really, really cool people.
What was your motivation to go to art school? And it wasn't photography, was it?
No, I went and studied drawing, painting. My father was an architect, so I kind of wanted to be an architect. All my heroes are architects, but I wasn't good enough at mathematics to do it because of probably dyslexia. I
Yeah.
couldn't deal with that side of it, the plumbing and the electrics and all the measurements. So I went and studied graphic design, which was actually amazing for me because I learned about typography, I learned about art direction, I learned about how to structure a page. I learned, I did my history. So I learned about art history, which is so important for all our listeners. You've got to know your history. So I learned about Rodin, Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, Cézanne, Jericho, all my favorite. All this is in my work. But at St. Martin's, I started to study real graphics. And that's when I learned about Russian constructivism. I learned about Swiss typography, how to make a poster. What does a poster do to stand out? And, I learned about heroes of mine who were like George Lois, who eventually I got to know. He did all the Esquire covers in the 1960s, which were legendary. And he became, in the end, I got to meet him, and then he became like family to me. He became my godfather almost. So he became my mentor and teacher. So all this stuff was interesting. And part of our course was to try out photography. Now, I wasn't great at handling type. I did it and I learned a lot from it, but I knew I wasn't going to be the best typographer.
Yeah.
But one day, part of our project was, here's a camera. It was a Hasselblad. So test it out in the studio and make a poster. And I took a picture of my friend with it in the studio, one light, white background, very simple. My friend got nervous. I got nervous. It was like, what is this? Why am I feeling like this? Holding a camera. This is my friend. Why are we both suddenly, it's like life's just been amped up? And I did the pictures. It was such a powerful experience. It was magical. And the pictures weren't very good. I didn't know what I was doing with the f-stops and everything. So I was focusing more on my friend than I was the mechanics. And then I realized next time I can't let my friend down by take a shit picture. I've got to do my homework. So I started studying, understanding the balance of light and speed, f-stops versus shutter speed. It's like a constant balance. Or, how do you manage that? Depth of field, amount of light coming in. And although at the beginning it was very technical, I saw it through another way. I just saw it. This is how your eyes work. This is how life works.
Yeah.
So I mastered it. I realized I have to master that so I'm not distracted by it. And from that moment on, that was it, man. It was about this powerful connection between me and a person. And it didn't have to be someone famous at all. I wasn't going to be photographing anyone famous. I was at art college. I was photographing all my friends, my mom and dad, my sister, my dog. I was photographing my grandmother, all my teachers at school. They all sat for me. I went to all my local shopkeepers in the neighborhood. I photographed them all in their shops. I went to the old people's home nearby, and I set up a little white background, and I photographed every old person who was living there. And I would always come back a few weeks later with a present, a gift of a print for each person. And I suppose that was the beginning of starting to function as a photographer. But in those days, it was about practice, and it was about loving this so much that it's a process. Yeah. Having people sit for you, it's a great privilege. And it never changes. It's still like that today.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little more because, to watch you work as a photographer, it's almost like forgetting that the camera exists. And there's, I always talk about, to be a good portrait photographer, there's a certain amount of empathy you have to see. And do you believe that that's what it takes to because when you're working with the subject, and I know most of the questions we got, a lot of them, people want to know your process in actually sitting down and talking with someone and breaking them down in that. And sometimes you have 15 seconds to shoot with someone, and sometimes you have amount of time. And I want to spend some time right now to really kind of talk about the process of you and the way you deal with your subjects.
Well, just think of it like walking, right? When you go for a nice walk in the park, you do not look down at your feet, and you do not say, I'm putting one foot in front of the other and I'm going to swing my balance so I can move forward. Photography has to be like that. You can't be distracted with putting one foot in front of the other. You can't be distracted by what your f-stops are going to be. Where is the light going to be? While the magic is right there in front of you, moving, living, coming and going. It's fleeting. So I developed a system through trial and error. I was never actually taught to be a photographer, because when I studied graphic design, it wasn't part of the course. It was a graphics course, so I branched off, dumped typography, and said, I'm going to be a photographer on this course, which caused a lot of problems at the art college. And all our friends tuning in from SVA, to the horror of your teachers, I encourage you to challenge the system. Your teachers want you to, but not for the sake of being difficult, for the sake of good art. That's your job. But you can't just say, I'm not going to do that project because I don't like it, and not do it. You've got to do something that's better and prove to everyone that you mean business and you put your money where your mouth is. So that was my mindset. So I developed a very simple technique. If you want to really talk about tech stuff, I don't normally talk about this.
No, in fact, I don't want to talk about the tech stuff at all. I want to talk about.
No, it's kind of important.
Connection, yeah.
And this is one of the first times I've ever gone into this level, but as you're all photographers, why not? I shoot with a lot of light. Okay. I crank up the flash, the strobe, and I do that for a reason, because that allows me to shoot with a big f-stop. Right. So that means I get more depth of field. So that means I don't need to use a tripod. I hate tripods because it's like it locks me down like a chain around my feet and I can't move. And if you have someone with you in front of you and they're fidgeting and they're moving and they're like, they can't get this right, they can't get straight. So you have to adapt to them and move quickly to where they are. I can't do that on a tripod. I mean, my assistants know I fucking hate tripods. All these bits and bobs that you've got to change. By the time you've got it right, it's over. The person's probably gone to lunch. So I figured it's got to be handheld. If it's handheld, then you're going to get camera shake. So you need a lot of light. And I like medium format. So I've always shot on Hasselblad, and I shoot on film still. So I shoot on the same camera, same light, same background, same film, haven't changed. That's just my way.
Yeah.
So a lot of light allows me a lot of flexibility, because I realize that actually a shoot with me is going to be quick. It's a sprint. It's not a marathon. I don't like spending more than 45 minutes doing a shoot. That's too long. I can't sustain this intensity. And I started to, when I started photographing difficult people or challenging situations, I realized the first thing that's difficult is the amount of time you have. So I figured, okay, that's just a fact. Someone is giving me 10 minutes. Maybe 7 minutes. I think Putin, I had 7 minutes. Clinton, I had 8 minutes.
Do you find yourself putting, like, I know that you do your homework and you come prepared for these shoots, no?
Yes and no. I mean, my homework is a meditative state of opening up my mind so that I'm going to be focused. I've got to control my nerves, because we all get nervous before a shoot. And when you're nervous, you get clumsy.
Yeah.
And when you're socially clumsy and distracted, you make mistakes technically, and you also make mistakes socially with people. So when the shoot starts, you have to find a way. It took me a long time to do this, where you've got this surge of energy going through your veins, which is adrenaline, and you can't make that go away. That just means you're excited and you're anxious and you're supercharged about what you're about to do. But it's there, and you have to find a way to channel that and redirect it so it actually helps you rather than disrupts your process. And on my team, Michelle, who is with us today, who's my chief of staff, she sees this process all the time when we're doing a shoot. Before a shoot, it's a dark and lonely place, man. It is so dark and lonely because I don't know what the subject's going to be like when they walk in. And I know that I'm putting a lot of importance. There's a big stake on this, that I want this to be important. It will become an important picture because I want it to be important. I care about it and I invest in it. Consequently, it might actually become important. And if I can get my subject to feel the same, that we're about to do something that's important, it becomes important. And that doesn't mean it's a famous person. It can be even more important if it's someone you've never heard of, like a human rights defender. So the process of before they walk in the room is very difficult for me, and it never ends. If any of you have seen that documentary on Netflix called Abstract, before Colin Powell walks in the room, I don't know if it comes through, but what I'm going through inside is just awful. And I'm not a newcomer to this. By then, I'd done like 25, 30 years of photographing people, but it's still the same. I don't know what it's going to be like, and I really care. It's going to be a lovely moment where we connect. And I was trauma inside. Focus, calm yourself down, get your feelings in shape, tidy up the chaos. So when he walks in the room, I'm ordered, I'm observant, I'm seeing who he is, how he's feeling. I'm watching him look around the room and settle. I'm understanding what his handshake means. You can read as soon as they walk in the room, you hear their voice. You sometimes reach out to shake their hand. That's all information.
Oh.
And I can't waste any of that information. So I have to read it. So by the time he actually sits in front of the camera, I'm already pretty familiar with who this person is. So that's what's going on in my head.
Yeah. Well, now, I think this continue on this a little more is because obviously when you start shooting portraits, you don't have this wealth of experience and hours of talking and dealing with people. So your early youth, looking back now, what did you do and what would you tell people to, like, man, if I only knew this when I was younger, this is like, it's not about the camera, it's about me connecting. And what are the steps that really kind of are so important to you that now you understand it, but you didn't back then?
Well, number one, know your craft, right? You've got to have your technical stuff sorted, because there's so many problems that can go wrong with photography. It's like an operating theater. There's so many things that can go wrong. Flying a plane, so many things that can go wrong. Taking a photograph, so many things that can go wrong. So I built up a whole system of backups. You have a light I always shoot one light, keep it simple, because I don't want too many opportunities for lights to be distracting for me. So one light. Now, if that light goes down, you have a backup light. You have it ready, set to the side on a stand, ready. So if that light bulb goes, you just move it out, move the other one in, plug it in, let's go. You've got the settings ready. That's ready. You've got to have all the settings on the camera ready, set. You do all your light readings before the person walks in. I have never done a Polaroid on one of my subjects. Never done a light test on one of my subjects. Never. The worst thing you could do is they sit in front of you and it's a magical moment and you're faffing about doing tests, seeing how it looks. And then they're looking at the Polaroid with you and going, oh, I don't like the lighting yet. I don't like that shape. You've lost them, game over. So I would do all my testing either on a stand-in, one of my assistants, or in the old days when I started, I would just sit in the chair myself and do a sort of selfie with a light reading, look at it. Yep, it's okay. And I would put like a flower pot on the stool and do a picture of that just to see how it looks, check that the camera's working. Then you move the flower pot away and wait. And then you are ready. It's like before a race. Person walks in and everything is done. You have, I don't know if it's ever been shown. I think it was on Abstract on that Netflix thing, but when we work, it's like an operating theater, laying out the lenses. You have order, 3 or 4 lenses, all in order. Then you have the backup lenses behind. So, but they are stacked in parallel. So at a grab, you're not going to accidentally grab the wrong lens. The lens hood should be off, so it's ready, and you gently place the lens down on the table. They should all be set at the right f-stop already. Of course, you're going to knock it when you put it on your camera if you change lenses. But if you get used to handling a lens, you don't knock it. When you're working with an assistant, it takes a lot of training for me, an assistant, to get into that very high level. It's like a beautiful dance. So there's nothing awkward. I teach my assistants to move gently, especially around my subjects. Some of my subjects, if you're photographing a world leader, you do not come in with a light reading like this, because you will be arrested for that. All right. They've probably got armed guards watching us if it's someone like Mugabe or Gaddafi. So we all know the way you move affects the person. Everything that's on set affects the person. Yeah. An open door in the room affects the person because the energy in the room is going out the door. I always close the door. I always like to find out who the advisors are in the room, who are really pulling the strings.
Yes. Yeah.
So many of celebrities I've worked with, I'm talking to them and they're looking over my shoulder at their publicist
handler
over there saying, oh no, don't do what he just asked. Mm-hmm. So I have to figure out, I'm actually negotiating not with my sitter, I'm negotiating with the organ grinder back there.
Yeah.
You know, never negotiate with a monkey when the organ grinder is in the room.
How do you, like, when you're working, I mean, you've worked with people that don't speak the same language. You've worked with people that are, that are serious heavy hitters that have killed people. That, I mean, how do, like, working from one to another, do you change, or do you just walk in with an open mind and ready to connect? Because that connection you do has to be so quick because you don't have much time, but you have to have a serious and honest connection. How have you refined that in what you do?
I once, worked with, I worked with him a lot. Wynton Marsalis, who is one of the greatest musicians in the world. He's a jazz trumpeter, for those who don't know. He's a beautiful guy and he's a genius. And I worked with him a lot, actually. And we got to know each other. Haven't seen him in a few years, but he's a great guy. And I once asked him, where does the music come from? And he said something that was so beautiful. He said, it doesn't come from me, because I assume the music comes from inside him, right? He said, it doesn't come from me. He described it as a frequency that's always there. And what you have to do is tune into that frequency. It takes a lot of concentration, a lot of focus, almost meditation. But if you can tune into that frequency, you tap into something that is its own magical universe of beautiful creativity or humanity, whatever it is you want to call it. And that is what comes out through the music. Now, actually, photography is the same. And that's why that resonated with me, what he said, because he illustrated what it really feels like when I connect with someone. What I'm looking for is their frequency. And everyone's frequency is very different. You know that feeling when you've got a radio and you're dialing up and down and it goes fuzzy for a bit, and then suddenly you find the station for a few magic moments, and then it's gone again.
Yep.
And you want to get back, but it's so hard to find. Or for us all now, we've all got our cell phones, and then the signal goes bad, and you're struggling to get that signal in the middle of a really important phone conversation, and the person's starting to break down their voice. It's the most frustrating feeling. And then suddenly you get to the right spot in the house, and you hear their voice again. That is a frequency. And so when you're photographing someone, the reason why language is not important, the reason why hierarchy is not important, whether they're famous or unknown, powerful, nice, kind, or whether they're a villain, none of that actually matters. All that matters is that you find their frequency. And if you can tune into it, you just stepped into their universe, and you are in their humanity. It's a perfect balance between their mind and their heart. It
What
can be
made you
volatile.
what
It,
made you kind of find that frequency though? What was it that you used as tools to like, I'm understanding this more and more, and like, what makes you able to tune that in? Like, can you teach that to someone? Is it something you inherently have? Is it something that you've worked on? Is it something that can be developed? It's like, how do you find that frequency?
I've always been fascinated by people. I can't help it. Um, like as I said, some people are brilliant at science. I'm not. That's their thing. That's their gift. Um, I'm not. I'm not an intellectual. Clearly, my ideas, my philosophies come from the street, but they come from being so interested in the human condition and how it works. Before I was a photographer, I was just the same. I used to sit in my Greek village in the mountains where I was brought up, and I had a sketchbook when I was a kid. This is how I learned to see. And I would sit and draw the old people who sit in the village square. And you start to watch their beautiful mannerisms as they're drinking their coffee, as the old ladies are having a gossipy chat amongst each other, as the old men are pretending they're cool and, like tough guys and macho, when actually they're a bunch of softies. And you just start to see all these lovely little relationships, and the way people move when they're curious, the way people move when they're slightly pissed off. When I went to art college, it shifted. Even before I started taking pictures, I had a little sketchbook about this big, and I would sit on the subway train, call it the Underground in London, and I would spend days on the Underground train just traveling. And what happens is, it's called contour drawing. You learn to draw someone without taking your eyes off
Yes.
them
Right.
and looking down. And I realized that every time you look down at your paper, you're losing a contact with that person. Of course, you might not be making accurate marks because you're not measuring it as much on the paper, but what you are getting is more of their character. So it sometimes looks like a Picasso-esque face, because you haven't, the eye is slightly here and the ear is here, and it's all mixed up because you haven't been looking down at your paper. But in a strange way, you've got that person's character. And I used to draw people on the Underground falling asleep, reading a newspaper, picking their nose, whatever it is. And I had hundreds of little books of studying how people exist. Now, it's kind of the same now. This is the danger with digital photography, because it's like that notebook. When you take a picture of someone, the worst thing you can do is look down at your camera the way I train myself not to look down. As soon as you're looking down, you are no longer connecting with the person, and you are stepping away from them, and you're being distracted by what you just did instead of focusing on what you are doing and what you will do. It's like going backwards. If you are really good, you shouldn't ever need to look at the camera. And even
It's
when I do shoot digital, I never look at the camera.
You bring
Never.
up such a great point. Is like, if you want to excel at what you do, I always like to equate it to being a professional athlete. You need to eliminate the distractions, and and focus on what you're doing. And that is sounds exactly what you're saying here, is eliminate the distractions and focus and have that connection, which is a beautiful thing. I'm going to ask another question, and then I want to anybody that wants to ask a question live, raise your hand. I know that we have Lisa that wants to, and but if you, there's a little at the bottom, it says raise hand, so I can find you quickly.
I hope to our friends tuning in, this is interesting. I mean, I'm just being honest with
So
everyone.
we're getting feedbacks like, I love to hear how you operate on a Zen level, curiosity, vision, indeed curiosity. So we're getting lots of comments here. So people are definitely, such an interesting story. Thank you for sharing. Very inspiring. So I think a big wow with exclamation points. So I think we're hitting some marks here, hopefully. So I want to talk basically, you're Greek, English accent, live in America. You're in a world where now immigration and all of that is a very kind of hot topic that I want to talk about your social responsibility and how you feel as an immigrant in America, your responsibility. Because a lot of times photographers may, we shoot a lot of different things, and you are now shooting things that have a lot of gravity, and you're shooting things that have an emotional repercussion to you. Like, you're shooting things like people that were raped in war zones and stuff like that. To connect on that level and walk away, how does that affect you? And being an immigrant, how does that affect your work?
Well, it's about empathy. Now, empathy gets confusing if the person you're photographing has done bad things. That's where it gets confusing. And you have to kind of come to terms with that if you're going to be a portrait photographer. What is your job here? Is it just to celebrate people that you are told are good people? Or is it to try and, in my case, I see it as trying to cure society's amnesia. And I'm not putting that all on my pictures as if I'm some kind of great person. That's what all photographers actually do. We try to record what was happening for the next generation to look back and say, wow, that's what life was like at that time. Those people existed. That's what they wore. That's how they lived. That's how they behaved. And that's how we don't forget. So if you're going to strip that down to the people that were around, whether they are dictators or whether they are heroes, it's not always clear. I have to say, most of the time it is fairly clear, right? I mean, if I'm photographing Gaddafi, it's pretty clear. And it got clearer and clearer as time went on. But in other cases, I've photographed a lot of people who were celebrated at that time who turned out to be monsters of society. I didn't know it at the time. So it's a very dangerous game to go in and try to say, this person's cool, so I'm going to take their picture and I'm going to promote them. I think we should suspend ourselves from that. It's not our position to judge anybody. It's for history to judge. Our job, this is the way I see it, it's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Our job as photographers is to just document and try to create a true moment of connection. When I worked with Putin, I am very aware of his record regarding to freedom of the press, human rights, women's rights, immigration, nationalism. I'm very aware. In fact, I have many friends who have been imprisoned in Russia for standing up for their beliefs. And I know of a lot of great people who have lost their lives as well. I'm not saying he's directly responsible, but it's as part of excessive nationalism. So I'm not naive. I am not naive.
Yeah.
But my job is to try and connect with him and take a picture that is him. Now, the picture of Putin is an interesting one because I've heard that he loves that picture. I've heard that he and his supporters like that picture because it shows him as a tough nationalist, right? The man who will put Russia back at the table of power on the global stage. And you could argue that's exactly what he's done. He's doing it right now. At all costs. On the other hand, his opponents, many of my friends in the human rights community, also love that picture because it's given them a banner for how power has been corrupted in Russia. And for instance, the LGBTQ community in Russia have adopted the picture and they photoshopped rouge onto his cheeks and the rainbow colors and things like that. And they circulate it online. And recently there was a decree from the Russian Federation, from the government, that anyone who is caught circulating a doctored picture of mine, of Putin, especially in support of LGBTQ rights, they will go to jail straight away. So isn't it bizarre how it's the same picture? So my job is I'm not in a position to judge. I gave everyone a picture for them to have respectful debates about, and history will judge whether he did good or bad.
Yeah.
I'm not in a position to do that. So that's how I always look at it. And it's the same when I'm photographing a defender who has been robbed of power, of human rights, a very brave activist who is a former political prisoner, or someone who is a survivor of sexual violence, or anyone who's been through the mill and had their human rights and civil rights abused. If I'm photographing them, so I'm not making judgments. I'm trying to capture them at their most honest. Now, it so happens that something often magical happens with someone like that. And if you treat people like that with respect, they just come alive in the most beautiful way. And they, in front of my camera, they become heroic because they actually are heroes. They're not, often they don't want to be seen as victims, even though they've been victimized. They want, it's a struggle to overcome adversity. We all know that. Anyone who's been through it, who's tuning in today, will know how hard it is to overcome that. And for someone to overcome it and come through it the other side, even if you're damaged or scarred, you are a warrior of time, man. You are a hero. And that seems to come alive in the picture when I take it. And the one thing about my pictures of defenders of human rights and civil rights is that I don't ever photograph them as victims. I just photograph them as I see them. And most of the time, despite their vulnerabilities, and they are very intense sometimes, their vulnerabilities, something magical and powerful and empowering comes out of that you just can't stop. It's a force of nature. And it's a privilege to give people like that a platform.
Well, as I'm going to ask Nathaniel and Rihanna and Lisa and Trevor to get ready, because I'm going to allow you to talk in a moment here, but I want to follow up one question. One thing that I saw on the Netflix, and I'm going to refer back to that, which is a wonderful piece if people haven't seen it, is you talk about there's a responsibility in gravity if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a heavy thing to talk about. And what did you mean by when you said that?
Well, especially if I'm dealing with human rights issues. And I've been taught by great people. I've collaborated with organizations like Human Rights Watch for a long, long time. And, I don't have, maybe now I have more access, but when I started, I didn't have access to these powerful stories. So you have to realize that to be a photographer, you have to be part of a partnership. You have to partner with people who have access to these stories, who have these special relationships with people in the front line of history, and who will take you there. But to do that, you have to earn their trust, because trust is a very powerful thing. And especially if someone has gone through difficult times with an oppressive government regime, for instance, their personal security is on the line. So I have to be very careful how I talk about them, how I photograph them, how much information should I convey with the picture or with the caption that goes with the picture. And I have to make sure that they have a stake in that process, that it's not me as perhaps a journalist coming in taking a story, grabbing it and running with it and putting my agenda on it, that I have to say, actually, the most important thing is mutual respect with my subject. And they have to tell me what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. And if they can't tell me, that's where it's on my shoulders to get it right. And I have to use my own judgment. And if I get it wrong, I could seriously hurt someone's reputation, or worse, I could threaten their life, because suddenly their identity is known if they're an undocumented worker in America. And I'm not watching the details, that they trusted me with their name and their picture, and I abuse that trust, then their family's well-being could be threatened, because they could be deported if it's put in the hands of the wrong people. So yeah, the responsibility actually becomes much more on your shoulders with people who are much more vulnerable. And I think we all need to acknowledge that, especially in these times, that what we say and what we do and how we conduct ourselves really matters. And I know nowadays we're all living in the present and everyone's canceling everyone out. But the reality is, try to be dignified with your work. Take your work very seriously. To be a photographer is a badge of honor, but that's not something you carry lightly. That means with that badge of honor, it comes with a price, and the price is responsibility. You pick up a camera and you're photographing someone who trusted you on any level, you now carry that trust with respect. And your job is to be honest and human, but also to have empathy for the person you're photographing, especially if they're vulnerable.
Beautiful. Nathaniel, you are welcome to talk. You there? All right, we're going to go to Brianna.
Hi, my name is Rina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Hi, it's such a pleasure. I didn't plan on talking, but you were so encouraging. So thank you so much.
Come on, do it.
Thank you so much. I'm calling you from the Bronx. I am
Nice.
a late in life photographer, started only 8 years ago. And I have a series. I photograph plus size and BIPOC fans in Star Wars conventions. And there's a convention in May. And I've gotten a lot of I'm preparing for it, a lot of different advice. And I would love to ask your opinion in going about doing this series. How would you advise someone like me in creating consistency in these photos, especially in these spaces that are so uncontrollable?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think continuity is really important. And every great photographer's idea of continuity is very different. You know, mine is the framework for someone to step into. It neutralizes everything. The white background or the blue vignette background, if it's in color, the simple shapes, no distractions, and then the intimacy of the person. That's my continuity. If you'd have spoken to someone like Dorothea Lange in the 1930s, she would have said a very different thing about her continuity. So everyone's different, and everyone is just as validated as everybody else. But I do know what you're saying. You know, what you have if you're going to do one of these conventions is a terrible place. The lighting is terrible. The place itself is just stripped of all, interest in humanity, beige walls, corporate architecture everywhere, bloody awful furniture, a plant pot on the side or some drapes. But the people are really fascinating. Yes. Because they've formed a sort of private community, you could say, of culture within. It's like a subculture, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's really interesting. And if you imagine someone like you doing something similar in the 1940s or the early 1950s, how cool would those pictures be today? or the 70s or the 60s. So what you're doing is really important, because I mean, imagine photographing people who were fanatics about Star Wars when it came out. And if you'd photographed them all at the time, what would they all be dressed like? It would be part of the late 70s, right? So everyone's attitude would be different. And you would have caught this subculture that's fascinating. So I would say, I can't help telling you how I would do it, but I can't tell you how you should do it. But if I was doing it, I would set up my white background and I would strip out all the stuff that is not relevant. And I would focus all my energies on the fascinating personalities and the way they dress and the way they hold themselves and their enthusiasm for their subculture. That's really interesting. But the bits in the convention center are not interesting to me because it's not part of the story for me. But that's just my way. And this is really important, that all the things I say to you all today, there's no law. There's no Platon's law. This is a good way or a bad way of doing it. This is just the way I did it. I hope and expect you all to find much more interesting ways of solving these problems your way. And that's when it gets really, really interesting. So I would empower you to be you, and all the things that you've got that magical little, you could call it a devil whispering in your ear of creativity saying, do it, do it, do it. And yet you've got the other one, the coward, the conventional one saying, no, 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 that's not how it should be done. That's never going to sell. The magazine's not going to like that, or the client's not going to like that, or that's just too much. This is the one that counts, right? The naughty one, because the naughty one is pushing you to be authentic. That's what it's all about. So good luck. I'm sure you're going to come up with the most amazing pictures. Dive in, enjoy it. And
you better be sharing them with us at APA so we can spread the wonderful
yes, spread it around the world. We all look forward to it.
So
Thank
we're going to
you
go
so
with
much.
we're going to go with Trevor next. Thank you so much. That was awesome. We're going to Trevor next, but someone wrote, this has been a wonderful session. I am listening from my office and soul. It's been a very inspiring morning, reminding me why I love and have passion for taking a break from everyday work. Thank you again. Trevor, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Awesome.
First off, Trevor calling from Toronto, Canada. Huge. This
I
is
love
what
that this has turned into like you're on the air. Thank you for 101 BC. Trevor from Brooklyn.
I'm gonna
Go ahead.
fanboy a little bit. I just want to say Platon's Republic is one of my favorite books, and it's been super influential in the work I'm producing now. I've been doing photography about 19 years, mostly celeb portraits and stuff like that. And I went through this weird slump for a while where everything was robotic. And I heard a speech you gave where you said that you went on a trip which was completely free and your agent was pushing you to do it. And when you got there, it was a calendar that said, Platon is here to help us.
Oh,
So that story inspired me to find what I really want to do with photography and the power I have with my camera. So 2 years ago, I started a project photographing veterans from Canada that normally wouldn't get their say in the story. People from different diversities, women, people from different religions, different cultures, women who were sexually abused in the armed forces, and and right now I'm in the process of traveling across the country, photographing over 400 portraits for this exhibit, which I'm self-funding. Hopefully someone comes and gives me a big chunk of change to help make this happen. But right now I'm in the place where I'm photographing a lot of portraits, and each story is different. And I want to give like power to those images. But when it comes down to editing down to which images I want to have in this exhibit or to print or put into a book, what am I looking for? Because I don't want to discredit anyone's stories, because every story is super important and it touches their families, it touches them. It's part of the history of what it means to be Canadian and serving. So that's where I'm
it's a
stuck
good
right now.
question, Trevor. Firstly, congratulations, because you're doing something that's really, really important. You're using your gifts as a photographer to be transformative. And actually, that's what we all aspire to. You know, being a photographer and just continuing a system that is clearly broken, perpetuating it doesn't really, that's not how we want to spend our lives. You know, so to use your gifts on celebrating and telling stories that are important. It's not just giving people a voice, but it's also helping the viewer understand how complicated the world really is. And I think that's an amazing thing. So congratulations to
Thank
you
you.
on that. You mentioned something that it's self-funded. Look, I'm going to be honest, it's very difficult to do the work that's in your heart and get someone else to pay for it. I'm going to be honest about that. You know, it's always been a negotiation with me that if I was working with a client, you know, you want to get the client to go as close to what's in your heart as possible while still feeling that they are walking away with something that works for them, whether it's a magazine or a record label or whatever it is. So often the closer it is to your heart, the further it is away from someone who's funding it. Most of my work now, in fact, nearly all of it in photography is I'm not working with any clients at all anymore. I've become a complete amateur, and all my work now is really self-funded. I set up my own foundation so that we could raise money ourselves and be completely independent. So we are not a burden on human rights organizations or the media in any way. And that way I have control. But that means I have responsibility, as I said earlier. And it means I also have to keep the machine going. And it's a very hard thing to do. So I know what you're doing is really hard, but there is no easy answer. And for everyone, tuning in today, who's trying to think, I want to do something, but there's no client that will pay for it. That's right. There is no client that will pay for it. So you're going to do it anyway, and you're going to find a way. And creative people are so resourceful. We find a way. Make it cheap, make it economical, make it simple, because the most important thing is the message. So, I think you're doing the right thing there. In terms of editing, there comes a moment when you're managing a big project, and all of you will understand this, where you're just thinking of travel, you're thinking of production, you're thinking of technology, technique, you're thinking of stress, exhaustion. Are you eating your sandwich at lunchtime when the right person comes by and you want to grab them? All these things are distracting. And then there's a moment when you get to tune into that frequency that I talked about before. And then there's this magic moment on a shoot. Well, it's the same when you're editing. You've got to, when I edit my contact sheets, you go into this sort of meditative place, because you are basically trying to listen to your heart. There's a moment, and I'm sure every single person tuning in right now, you've got to think about a moment in your life where the slightest thing gives you that rush in your heart. It's probably a moment when someone you find attractive just gives you a look across the room. It's only a look, it's no big deal, but you make eye contact and that does something. Do you all know what I mean? And it might not be that. It might be a hug of a friend, or might be a hug from your parent or a relative, or something's going to give you that feeling. When you're looking at your work and you're trying to choose which picture is most important, there is a mental discipline to that. Which composition is most tidy, which tells you the right information. But there's also something else. It's the human bit, the human connection. And I think that's really important, that you get in tune with that frequency. And when you're looking at two pictures and you're trying to decide which one is the right one, I look at one, empty my mind and my feelings. I look at the other, empty my mind and feelings, and then just see which one gives me that little rush of emotion. And when you're tired or you overuse that instinct, it fades away. It's a magical, fleeting thing. It's like, why are some musicians suddenly, they just hit this beautiful note and it's just like, oh, what is that about? It's that thing again. It's an artist at their best. And when you're editing as a photographer and you're choosing between one and another picture or one subject against another, that's you at your best if you get it right. If you get it wrong, it's you at your worst. Either way, it's you being what you do. So I would say trust your judgment. Listen to your heart. Listen to your mind, because that will tell you the details that you need to know. But you've also got to listen to your heart, and your heart will tell you which image do you respond to as a human being? Which story do you respond to as a human being? And if you respond to it, then there's a good chance the viewer will also respond to it. And that's what it is. I once asked Neil Young, who's been in the press a lot lately with Spotify, but I spent a great day with him years ago, and he's done some pieces of music that everyone loved and celebrated. And he's done some albums, weird concept albums and heavy rock albums that everyone hated. So I said to him, how do you feel when you're criticized by the critics? Like, what does that make you feel as an artist? Maybe an album, they said was rubbish. And he said something so beautiful. He said, look, when you're an artist, it comes from your heart. As long as you're being authentic, you are never wrong. They might not like it. They might not get it. They might not understand it. But if you are being authentic and it's coming from your heart and you are creative and you are talented, it's the right thing to do. And if you look back at history, there is a history of beautiful people, sensitive people doing what they believe in. And at the time they were criticized by everyone. But history's taught us that they were right because it came from their heart and it was true. So be an artist and just be true. And it's the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm going to ask you a question, and then we're going to go to Lisa and then Andy. But at the very beginning, at the top of us talking, you had talked to. You said you wanted to talk about something, and it kind of got glossed over. And I'm going to come back to it right now. Do you remember? Did you ever watch like the MTV's Behind the Music? Do you remember those documentaries? They would talk. Oh, they had the biggest success, and then darkness set in, or something like that. I wanted to kind of. You briefly talked about dealing with those dark periods on a personal level. I want to know when those dark periods come in. What was that like for you? What was a period that was dark for you? That was either, I don't know if I can continue with this, or this project is too much, and how did you come back from it?
That's a really good question. Look, the creativity is not mechanical. It's magical thing. It's part of the human condition, as I said, and it's fleeting. So I always quote people I've met, not because I'm a name dropper, but because they really taught me interesting lessons. So forgive me if I'm quoting a few people that you might all know, but all these magical moments I've had with these people, it's a lesson in life, and it made a difference to me. So it might make a difference to you. So I don't know if any of you know the music of Leonard Cohen, but an amazing musician who's sadly no longer with us. Spent a day with Leonard in his house in Canada, and he had just come out of a Buddhist monastery when I photographed him, so he was like totally zen, right? And he was kind of zen anyway with his whispering voice, but it was like something magical coming out of this guy that day. And I asked him a similar question about ups and downs of life, and he described it as you have your winning streak and your losing streak. And a successful life is nothing more than a few winning streaks strung together. And in between them, there are always losing streaks. You can't expect your life to move always in a positive way. It has to go wrong. It has to, for many reasons. And it's got nothing to do with whether you're a good person or not. Terrible things happen to really good people all the time. And as artists, it's a given we're going to run out of steam. It's a given that we're going to lose our way. And it's a given that we're going to do shit art sometimes. It's a fact. What's important is that we keep trying and that we are so committed to working through not just the winning streaks, but working through the losing streaks. The losing streaks are what make us better if we come out the other end. It's painful. It's very frightening when you're in a losing streak. But if you can keep working yourself out of it, that period somehow adds something magical to you when it starts to make sense again afterwards. He said to me that there's this thing called a masterpiece. This is Leonard talking. He said there's this thing called the masterpiece. So I said, what is that, Leonard? And he said the masterpiece is your inevitable decline. He said, you can be the most powerful person in the planet, but you can't outsmart the masterpiece. It's going to get us all. And I said, that's a bit dark, Leonard. Like, that's shit, man. I mean, I'm an optimist. I don't want to hear that. He said, think about it. That's not dark. That's actually really beautiful, because what that means is right now you have something magical. It's life, it's energy, it's creativity. And if you are going through a losing streak, I mean, there'll come a time when you don't have the basic things anymore. You don't have your health. You don't have a house. You don't have, maybe you're at the end of your life. You will long for that losing streak. It's about perspective. So don't think for a moment, I don't go through dark times or I don't run out of gas. I used to have this thing when I was a student. I no longer do it, but this helped me when I was young. And so this is particularly to my young friends tuning in at SVA. I'm sure you will go through times when you are consumed with doubt, right, about yourself. And you're thinking, I haven't got it. I'm not as good as I wish I was. I don't have the confidence to keep going. And I kind of want to quit. Or maybe someone just criticized your work and you feel a real loser. That's a very painful thing because you're dealing with your emotions and you haven't yet learned to manage them. So they can run riot. They're not disciplined. I'm an old geezer now. I'm an old man. I know how to manage my emotions. If someone pisses me off, or if someone hurts me, or if someone makes me feel proud, I know how to manage all that. I never get too big for my boots, believe it or not. And I never get too down either. It's leveled out. I have enough experience to do that. But when I was younger, I didn't. So if someone praised me, I thought I was God's gift. And if someone criticized me, I thought I was a complete loser and an idiot. And I would have these times where I was filled with, I guess you could call it moments of depression, right? So I would say to myself, all right, you feel crappy today. This is what you're going to do. You're going to stay indoors. You're not going to get out of bed. You're going to stay in your pajamas for 2 days. I'm just going to watch daytime TV and order pizzas for 2 days. I am not just going to feel a bit depressed. I'm going to wallow in self-pity. I'm going to take this to the max and feel as depressed as I possibly can. Bring it on. But after the time is done, 1 or 2 days, whatever I would set myself, that's the end. I've had my moment. I got it out my system. It's time to get back in the saddle, back on the road and get on with it because I've got a job to do. It doesn't mean it was over or it passed. It just means I gave myself a chance to get out those feelings. And once the worst of them are out, or at least the edge is gone, then you say, oh, it's not really that good a life staying in your pajamas all day, you know, like watching daytime TV, watching Oprah. No one wants to do that. So for me, it's like, right, I've done that. I didn't like that. I prefer being in the dark room, or I prefer trying out new ideas. Even if I'm struggling or on a losing streak or whatever we call it, still better. So that's how I cope with it. And it might help you guys.
It's, great that you said that. And where you started off saying this is to my younger people. No, that's for everyone. At every age, we all have self-doubt. We all have questions. We all deal with it in different ways. And I think it's such a beautiful thing. Like yeah, maybe it comes with age, and hopefully most people find it, but that piece to say, it's okay to be down today. It's okay. Embrace it. I'll fight my way back tomorrow, but today I'm gonna take a break.
There's something else, though, that is important. And right now, there are a lot of conversations about mental health, about
Yes.
being aware of each other, which is all really important, right? And it's become much more acceptable to talk about these things without judgment. But there's also something else that we must not forget here. I once spent the day with Quincy Jones, right? And I was in his house. For those of you who don't know who Quincy is, he's the world's greatest record producer. He worked with Michael Jackson. He did Thriller. He's worked with every great jazz musician in the world.
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder, everybody, and above all, maybe Frank Sinatra. He worked with Sinatra. He did Fly Me to the Moon with Sinatra and Count Basie. And that is the only song that was ever played on the moon. Buzz Aldrin told me that. So that's cool. Right. So this is Quincy Jones. Now, when Quincy was a young man, he was super talented and wanted to make arrangements, musical scores for Hollywood movies. And he started doing it. But as a young black man in America, the white establishment did not really want or welcome a young black talent in this predominantly white field of entertainment. And he faced a lot of opposition. So I was with him in his house, and I was a big fan of his. And I said, and he was very charming. If you've seen him before, he's like, he's always smiling, filled with warmth and charisma and smooth. And he's so handsome. And I said to him, Quincy, when you were a young guy and you faced opposition and critics who did not welcome you because of who you were as a person, who were prejudiced against you, what would you have said to them as a young man? And his face changed, and it's like this toughness and resilience took over his persona. And he looked at me and he said, this is what I used to say to them. Not one drop of my self-worth depends on your acceptance of me. So I know we all are vulnerable, and I know we're all struggling. That's a fact, especially during COVID, as we dare to come out of this bloody awful pandemic. But what we also have to conjure up is that in you is a warrior. In you, there is strength too. There is resilience. There is a fighter who is prepared to take on the battle and fight with a smile. Now, to do great work, being honest isn't enough. You're going to have to be resilient. It's a fact. And I believe in my heart, and I know this from experience, having photographed so many brave people who have seemingly lost everything in life. They are warriors, man. They still have the capacity to be kind to someone, to be compassionate, to show us what great leadership really is. And when I heard Quincy say that, I realized, oh my goodness, that's what made him great. It was his talent. It was his optimism, but it was also his resilience and his courage to say, even though I'm vulnerable, I refuse to allow you to somehow be in a position to judge me. I don't need your validation to say whether I'm great or not. That's my responsibility. I'll take care of that, which is what he did. It made a big impression on me, and it sort of amped up my own defiance, which I've always had, But when I heard that, man, I was like, all right, let's shake up the world, Quince. Let's just do this now.
Ah, wonderful. I'm going to read one comment, and then we're going to hand it over to you, Lisa, to ask a question. People don't know this, but we did a little pre-check, and we had all of these photos ready to go in the background, and we have someone ready to bring them up and stuff like that. And I just got a comment that I have to read. It says, "This is one of the very few photographer talks that works without showing any photos. The stories presented don't need visuals. Fantastic."
I have my amazing chief of staff. Her name is Michelle Murray. We call her Major Murray because she is a complete sergeant major. And she's brilliant. And she keeps my whole office running like a machine. She's ready with great, cool, fun pictures to show everyone, but it hasn't gone that way. And maybe that's okay. We're not here to, the pictures, this is a chance for us to just really dig a bit deeper than that, but I'm here for you guys, whatever you want.
I can't even read all the wonderful comments, and we'll share them with you after, but Lisa, you're up.
Thanks, Travis. Hi, I'm Lisa Wiseman. I'm from San Francisco. This is really fantastic, and like really the best intro to what I'm going to ask you ever to go deeper. So I don't need to give any backstory here, but I kind of have a two-parter question for you, something I've wanted to ask you for, a very long time, decades.
Right. I'm here for you.
So a two-parter, what for you is magic in the world? And what do you love most in the world?
Wow. Well, that's a big question.
We're not here to sweat the small stuff.
That's how we roll.
We said get deep and meaningful, didn't we? It's time to commit.
I've started a revolution and I can't even keep up with it. All right. Well, there's as a photographer and a storyteller, there are always some magic moments that happen along the way. And it's not what you'd expect. You never get it when in that situation. You never get what you're going to expect. Magical things happen. For me, it goes back to what we were just talking about, is how do we overcome? How do we rise above a challenge? How do we deal with our own insecurities, our own pain, and somehow turn that into something positive, something that can help people, something that reminds us of what it really is to be alive. So I photographed a girl. Michelle, if you could, I'm going to throw up a picture.
And Michelle, say hi. I know you did it in the chat, but you can say hi.
Where is our lovely Michelle? If you can share the picture, there's Michelle. There she is. Michelle, if you could share the picture of Esther with the baby. So I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I was there working with a friend of mine called Dr. Mukwege. I was campaigning to help him win the Nobel Peace Prize. He built a small hospital that helps women and children who are survivors of sexual violence. And it's a very difficult thing to do, what I was doing, trying to tell this untellable story. And as a white man, that's even harder. But if we don't try, the story never gets told. And this terrible thing called rape as a weapon of war just continues. So I partnered with the doctor, and I was photographing women. Here's the picture I'm going to talk about. I was photographing women and children who were survivors of sexual violence in this terrible place. So if you've watched the Netflix show, you'll see part of the making of this picture on Abstract. So this young woman comes in, and I think she was about 16. I can't really remember. So forgive me if I haven't got all the details right. Her name is Esther. This is her little baby boy, Jose. She comes into this little studio we'd built, and I'm surrounded by men who are my assistants. So you've got to understand, for a young woman to come in with her baby into a room of white men after what she's been through, that's a very brave thing to do. She walks in, sits down, she's got this beautiful little boy on her lap. And I ask her to tell me her story. I have a translator who's a doctor in the hospital. And she tells me a story. And her story goes something like this, that when she was about 2 years ago, she was fetching water, a year and a half ago, she was fetching water from a rural area for her parents to take home, carry home. A gang of militia gangsters grabbed her, kidnapped her, and took her to their camp in the woods. They tied her to a tree, and the whole gang of men raped her for a couple of days. Eventually, I believe the ropes came undone and she escaped. She made it to a village, and a man rescued her off the street in a village because she was injured by now. And he took her home, and then that man raped her. Eventually, he discarded her, and she walked for I don't know how long, hours, a day, 2 days, to the hospital where she had heard locally that there was this kind doctor who was helping women and children, who is this guy, Dr. Mukwege. He operated successfully on her. Turns out she was now pregnant from the rape. Here she is some time later, and I realize this little boy that she's got, who's beautiful, is born of rape. So I have a daughter, and I'm sitting by her feet while she's telling me this story. And I lost my composure. You can't not. And I had trouble keeping it together. And as she's telling me this story, she has this look on her face that you see in this picture that is curious, kind, compassionate, dignified, noble, respectful. And there's warmth in her humanity. I said to her as I stood up to take the picture, how is it that you're telling me the most awful story I've ever heard in my life? And I'm crying, and I'm a white, middle-aged, privileged man. But when I look at you, I see kindness in your face. And she said, the reason I'm not crying in your picture that you're about to take is because I don't want to make you feel sad. And she said, my mommy and daddy always told me that I'm on this earth to bring joy to the world. And I will keep my promise no matter what. I took the picture. And this picture I have used as you could say as a campaign tool. You could even say as a weapon to fight for positive change. And that story and this face and her compassion for someone who's much better off than her, despite her adversity, I think is one of the most magical things about the human condition. And I get to experience that as a person. So I know a lot of you think I'm well known for photographing presidents and world leaders and all that, but really, this is what it's about. This is an absolute privilege to be in the presence of someone like her. And the reason is because she taught me more about leadership than any world leaders ever taught me. That you take your adversity, doesn't matter how considerable it is, and you transform it into something beautiful, which is called empathy, because now you know what it feels like to hurt. And that is the most powerful thing, because suddenly you start to appreciate what everyone else is really going through. So I know many of you tuning in may have been through adversity. Many of you will go through adversity in the future. We can't avoid it. But as photographers of the human condition, if we go through hard times, we also have to acknowledge that now that means you know what it is to struggle, and you can tap into that frequency in other people and help tell their stories. And as painful as it is for us to go through hard times, whenever I'm struggling, I think of Esther. What she must have gone through. Oh my God. I've never gone through that. No matter what I've gone through some heavy shit, but nothing like that. So it's a great leveler, and it helps us all rise to the occasion.
I just want to touch base on that because it's something that I touched base on earlier, but this is the perfect time to really talk about it. Is you dealing with such heavy, heavy stuff, and it's so beautiful and it needs the attention. But having the success and I'll call it privilege and being in a situation like, and do you go home and like, how does that affect you? And is there like this privilege? I don't want to call it survivor's guilt, but it's not that. It's this privilege that I just left all these people in this, and I'm going home to my nice house, my family. This is it. How do you deal with that in terms of, because it does? There's no way it can't affect you. And I know you found the beauty in it, but how do you deal with the darkness of it?
Well, when I was doing the Netflix thing, I brought them with me, as you know, to the Congo. I brought their whole team, and there was one day they were interviewing me. I don't remember which day it was, but we were doing these things all the time. And I was in the middle of the interview and I just totally had a breakdown in front of the camera and I started sobbing like a child. And I could see, even though I was obviously losing it at the time, I could still see how awkward everyone in the film crew felt. They didn't know what's that. Is the guy having a nervous breakdown? This is a nightmare for Netflix, you know. And I wanted them to have a good interview for their show, you know. Look, yeah, of course. When I come back from one of these missions, I am emotionally devastated. It's a fact, because I have had these amazing, haunting, powerful connections with all these people. And only way I can describe it is, and I'm not a therapist, and I don't know how this stuff really works academically, but I know emotionally how it feels. Your emotions are up here. It's almost as if you have trouble breathing or swallowing to keep it down. And the slightest thing is going to be like a wave coming over, you know, like a tsunami of emotion. I can be watching TV and I'll just burst into tears. It's like it lasts for a month or two sometimes, depending on how heavy the trip was, because you've used your emotions so much that they're volatile now. Gradually it calms back down. But even though all that's going on, I don't really have guilt that a lot of photographers talk about, because I see myself as an activist and I have a job to do. I've got no time to feel guilty. Esther asked me to tell her story to the world. She wanted to sit on the same apple box that more world leaders have sat on than any other chair in history. That's what she wanted. And she wanted her voice heard. So I have a job to do. I can't fuck around with guilt. I've got no time for it. I promised her I would get her story out to the world, and I would tell the most important people in the world about what she'd been through to help people, politicians, business leaders, and consumers and workers put pressure on dark forces that drive this damaging stuff that's going on in the world. So I've got a job to do, and whatever guilt I feel, I just channel it. You know, I'm not saying I don't feel guilty sometimes, but if it's channeled in a job, then you feel I was there for a purpose and I kept my promise. I will feel guilty if I fail. That's when I feel guilty, but not coming back from a trip, because I was there for Esther. I was there to amplify her voice. Hopefully, message delivered. Hopefully, story and job done.
Have you found yourself in a situation abroad or with shooting something that you felt like it was turning or I've gotten in over my head?
Oh, I'm always in over my head.
Beautiful.
We're making a movie right now, my first big full-length film on America. And talk about being over your head, man. Like I'm dealing with the struggles of America. And I'm so in over my head. So in over my head. You know, but so isn't everyone?
Yeah. I think I cut off Lisa. She wants to know what do you love most in the world? The second part of her question didn't get answered. I think she feels.
Uh, I just love at the end of the day, it's been really tough to sit on the sofa with my wife and two kids and we watch a TV show. I've just watched a real teenage TV show called Outer Banks with my two kids who are teenagers. And it's like, I don't know, 5 seasons of the bloody thing. So, I've been watching it, every night for a whole string of nights. We've binged it together, but getting into their world and watching something that is sort of stimulating to them and getting the jokes and getting the sad moments and talking about the lighting and talking and just being safe and curled up on the sofa after dinner is just so lovely. And it's a privilege to have those moments. And before COVID, I was in a different hotel room 3-4 nights a week. I was on the road and I missed so much of my family. And so as devastating as COVID has been for all of us, and there's my mum, who lives in London. I have hardly seen her through the whole thing, which has been devastating. But I've been home with my kids, and that's one of the most lovely thing. Tipping of the balance, spending time with the people you really love. So that's my honest answer. I'd love to say there are all these lofty ideas, but the honest answer is just being with people you love.
We're going to take one more live question from Andy, and then we're going to take a question from Deb and some closing questions because now we got to get you fed. And unfortunately, I think we've gotten to 10% of all the questions. So hopefully, in some time we can have you back and
we'll do part two. We'll do part two
to this.
A sequel.
Because, and yeah, we'll even have more. And now I think everybody's going to be wanted to ask questions live.
Yeah, of
so
course.
We've broken the ice. We've broken the ice.
That's what I wanted.
Andy, join us.
So first off, almost 2 years ago to the day, I heard your keynote at a massive credit union convention in Washington, D.C., right before the world went into lockdown and right after my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. Your message changed my entire approach to photography and storytelling. So first of all, I just wanted to thank you for that blessing. Thank you so much. Here's my question. I'm working on a personal documentary project that combines photography, essays, and audio storytelling that will attempt to convince banks, credit unions, credit card companies, and mortgage lenders to forgive the debt they hold for terminal cancer patients in America in order to ease the profound physical and financial suffering they face and to close the massive racial disparities in cancer care in this country. What advice do you have for connecting with and photographing these terminal patients with respect and dignity while also convincing these huge corporations to take the challenges of these patients seriously and create the change that's so desperately needed in this country?
Wow, big question. Thank you for your kind words. You're asking, you're getting to the heart of what this is actually all about. You're using photography or filmmaking or storytelling as a weapon of change. That's very powerful. So you are now in the front line, brother. That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank
Welcome.
you, sir.
Welcome. How do you do it? I think you've got to step back for a minute, and I'll use some harsh words here, but I definitely don't want my friend Andy to take this the wrong way, because Andy will get exactly what I'm talking about. When we as storytellers are talking about an important story, we are emotionally connected with it, right? And we are invested in it because we did it. We were there. We felt that magical connection with someone in the story. But we have to also step back and see how our opponents are going to see it. You have to respect your opponent. You have to, if you're in battle, you have to respect your enemy. You have to know what their mindset is and what they're capable of to be able to fight that battle effectively. And all great generals in history always studied their opponents. Mike Tyson told me he always knew exactly who he's going to fight. And Muhammad Ali said the same thing. You study their movements, you study their psychology so that you can know what you're up against. Now, getting back to this, your opponents, I use the word opponents, a bit aggressive, but really it's the people that you want to change. They have their own agenda. And unfortunately for the cause, even if our work is important and worthwhile and worthy, they don't give a shit. They don't care because they've got in their mind a more important agenda. Often it's their job description. They're being paid to do something and you're asking them to do something that goes against their pay grade. That's a very challenging situation. So it's a philosophical question. You now have to get into their mindset as well as your mindset. You know your mindset. You know your story. You know the reason why you're compelled to drive change because you're a bloody beautiful human being. That's it. It's a fact. But you're up against someone who thinks differently. Now, let's get into their mindset now. This is how the game works. Now, if you look at how the media works, guilt doesn't work. Accusation does not work. They have a short attention spike. And you might get a little moment of attention in the media if you use those two tools, but you can't sustain a story with those two tools. It never works. If you look at what resonates in the media, it's a hero. It's a hero. You never see someone on the cover of Rolling Stone saying, screw you, you're an arsehole, or playing a victim. You see people in commercials and in movies as heroes. That's what everyone wants. So what I've learned through trial and error, Andy, is that I reckon I can tell the same story, but if I twist the way we look at someone who's been through adversity and don't think of them as a victim, even if they've been victimized, I think of them as a hero. That's a totally different story. And our opponents might like that story. So, Andy, you've got to start thinking, maybe you're already doing it. I hope you are. I have a feeling you are. But the people in your work are not just victims. The families are not just victims. They're heroes. I suspect you are a hero too, who have been through the mill. And it's hard. And yet you come through it and you're still kind to other people. That's what it takes to be a hero. That's what it takes to be a great leader. So you kind of have to con your opponent into taking this story because it's not about guilt or accusation or victimization. It's about heroes. It's an amazing story. It's like Rocky. And if you can get into their mindset and kind of brainwash them a little bit with this stuff, they will take the story. It's the same story. It's just a different approach. And that would be my advice to you. And I'm telling you that in a very honest way that I've learned from trial and error. You know, I've learned to apply the tools of celebrating someone that I used to use for movie stars and political leaders. I now switch it to people who've been robbed of power, and it works. So good luck. I expect you to do great things, Andy.
And Andy, I expect you to be doing voiceover work or something because you've got a radio voice there. It's very soothing and wonderful. So I hope that's part of it.
I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Cheers. So we have a couple of last questions. I always throw it over to Deb, who's here, our regional director here at New York, and she always has a wonderful question to kind of cap things towards the end. And then we're going to kick it with SVA, and then I got a couple of closing questions.
Cool.
First of all, thank you, Platon. I know I speak for everyone who's been chattering. This has been so inspirational. It's been so a fantastic talk. So thank you so much for your generosity of spirit. And I also love that you mentioned that you still shoot film because so many photographers think that photography is about chasing the latest technology and you're still shooting film. So I think that's a great lesson too. So I don't know if you had anything to say about that, but
No, it doesn't matter what you use. I mean, it really does not matter. You can shoot with your phone if you want. All that matters really is that you produce something that really moves people. When 9/11 happened, the most important pictures were not by professional photographers. It was all documents of ordinary people who were there at the time. And since then, I think it's the people on the street with the cheapest, the most accessible technology that are really driving storytelling now. So I think all that matters is it's important to you. It's your way of doing it, and the story resonates with other people. Find your own way. It's great. If it's a phone or if it's a old school camera like mine held together with gaffer tape, it doesn't matter.
You're muted, Deb.
Sorry, I had muted myself. It's a Zoom, so someone had to make that mistake. You mentioned trial and error. What's the biggest mistake you think you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, I've made so many mistakes. There's always something that goes wrong on every shoot. We have a tradition, or I have it's like superstition kind of thing that sailors have, old school sailors have, that you want something to go wrong before the shoot actually happens, as you're setting up. If you're on a trip, you want something to happen early, because something will go wrong, and I always like to get it out the way. If it's all gone smoothly, it could be the actual shoot that goes wrong. So those precious moments when the person is in front of the camera, I want nothing going wrong during that moment. Sometimes it does, but one of the first things I ever did at college, that one of those times I picked up my camera and took pictures of my friends. I went to a modeling agency and I asked them if I could practice on their models, the new ones. They called them new faces, because they were models, men and women, who were not established yet, and they needed photographs in their portfolio to go around. And I wanted practice and they wanted pictures. So it was kind of a good exchange. And it was another way of practicing. So I was doing old people in the old people's home. I was in the modeling studio. And this amazing model came into this to my college studio one day, and I was so excited to meet her. And she was just beautiful young woman. And I was so distracted by the fact that I was about to photograph a model that I forgot to set my f-stops and the pictures were black. There's nothing there. And I had to go back to the agency and explain to them why that poor young woman spent a whole day traveling to the shoot, doing the pictures, trying so hard to pose for me, take my direction, and then leave. And it was all a waste. And I was so humiliated with myself, for the model, because I let her down, for the agency. So that humiliation made darn sure that never happens again. And from that moment on, I still think, right, check the f-stops. I'll even say to my assistants, when they hand me a film, a new lens, I can't look down, because my eyes are on my subject. So it's just routine. I tell them the f-stops I want. I just mention the numbers to them and the shutter speed, and they say, "Yep, you're good." So I'm still thinking about that time 30 years later. But that's a good thing, right? It just keep it sharp.
I always feel like that the mark of a true seasoned professional is how they adapt and recover from mistakes, and that is, that is the main thing. I want to invite back Nivea from SVA. Are you there with us still? Hey, did you have a final question?
Yes. Well, no, I actually don't have a question, but I just wanted to express my gratitude for this really amazing and inspirational talk. It really is. And I know the students that are here with us, I'm sure they also have been looking at the chat, and I see a lot of happy people on here. So I'm really happy to be here too, and learn so much from you, and all of you, really. So thank you very much.
I've never seen such an interactive chat.
This is important. you all better know who Richard Avedon was, because if you don't, you're on the wrong track. Richard Avedon, Irving Penn, Helmut Newton were the three kind of great photographers of mid 20th century, and they were all great in different ways. Richard Avedon, though, was the sort of consummate American portrait photographer who everybody looked up to around the world. So I was in awe of all three of those photographers when I was starting. And I remember towards the end of his life, Avedon was a quite frail person, and he had this extraordinary contract at the New Yorker magazine, which is, I would still say, the greatest magazine in the world. And he was their only contract photographer. And his job there was to do large scale portfolios that would really stimulate the readers. And he was the first person to bring photography to the magazine. So quite a few years ago now, I was at one of the presidential, I think it was the Democratic convention where they choose a presidential nominee. And you've probably seen it on TV. It's chaos, speeches, ticker tape everywhere, everyone shouting, demonstrations outside the convention center. It's chaos. And you see all the political people fighting it out. And I was there taking pictures with my Leicas. I did not have, every space there is taken. So I did not have room to build a studio there. I didn't have that kind of muscle in those days. Avedon at this point was very frail, but was top of his game at the New Yorker. And he was shooting what would become his last ever project, which was a photo essay called Democracy, which was all about America and what democracy really is for America. And he had, obviously he was Avedon and it was the New Yorker, he had built a studio at the convention center, and he was pulling people in to be photographed, one of them being a young Barack Obama, right, before he was known. So I saw Avedon on the convention floor, walking around with his assistant and his producer, and he was a bit wobbly on his feet, white hair, and he was looking for subjects, and they were going up to people with a notepad saying, "Will you meet us in half an hour back at the studio on level 4 or something?" So I don't know, I was wound up with the excitement. I just rushed up to the guy and I said, "Mr. Avedon," I said, "I'm a young photographer and you're one of my heroes." And I said, "Give me the gauntlet. Give it to me. Give me the fucking torch, man. And I will run with it, man. I will try my hardest to shake up the world. I will take where you took us to, and I will try my hardest to take it further." And his assistant looked at me like, "How dare you? Let's get this guy out of here." And his producer looked at me like, "Oh God, this is a nightmare." Avedon gives me this huge hug. And it was like, he didn't let go. And I was hugging this old guy on the convention floor for about 2 minutes. And he was frail, he was little, but I could feel that he just wouldn't let go. And it was an amazing moment, man. I found out that he died 2 weeks later while he was shooting that project. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't happen overnight like a movie, but within a few years, I had the great honor and the great privilege to be given his contract at the New Yorker that they had not filled since he died. And that gave me the opportunity to take that torch that I had asked him for and to run with it and to try and drive positive change built on the shoulders of what that great guy had done. And I'm not saying I'm up there with Avedon. I'm not saying that I did any better than him or even close to him, but it felt like it was the passing of the torch from one generation to another. And there were lots of photographers that I was working with who also took that torch, and we did our own thing with it. And now anyone who's tuning into this talk, the torch is there. And it might be some of you, you might not be ready yet. That's okay. But there will come a point where the torch will be handed to you, and you will have to shake up the world with that torch. And for a photographer like me, I'm very happy to pass the torch. I don't want it all the time. I want to pass it on. There are amazing people on this call right now, and you will know yourselves. You will know I'm talking about you, that I see no reason why there won't be a handful of people who will lead photography into a beautiful, brighter place in the future. So don't let us down. Work hard, because you're up against people like me. But eventually I'm too old to do it. And I will willingly pass the torch to someone. But if I pass it to you, you can't let us down. You've got the responsibility to really kick ass with it. So I'm really excited by that. I expect greatness from people on this call. So tune in, work hard, and be transformative, and good luck.
That's about as inspiring as it gets. So I'm going to throw you my 3 rapid fire conclusion questions here. We all in our lives have that little nugget of inspiration and knowledge that is handed to us, whether if it's from our father or a mentor or something like that, that we repeat to our kids, our students, our friends. Is there something that you know that was given to you from someone that you like repeating and telling people as like that this is my little gift to you?
Well, it depends on the person. When I photographed Mark Zuckerberg, he had a poster on his wall, and it said in red letters, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" And I thought that was a very powerful question to ask ourselves. Would your life be different? Would your career path be different? Or would the relationships in your life be different? Don't think for a moment I would dare tell you that story as if I've got the answers, because fear has always played a part in my life. The irony is that when he walked in the room to be photographed, he himself was terrified. It's as if he never read the words to his own poster. And I've thought about that poster a lot since, especially as we see Zuckerberg, in my humble opinion, leading this giant corporation somewhere that I don't think is good for people. I think there are major problems with the infrastructure of that, but that's just my opinion. But the question of what would you do if you weren't afraid? I think there's something very dangerous behind that question, because it plays on the assumption that you should not be afraid. And all the people who I've had the privilege to get to know and make friends with in the human rights community and in the civil rights era in America, for instance, like Congressman John Lewis, like Muhammad Ali, like the Little Rock Nine, all those people, don't think for a moment they weren't afraid. They were afraid, but they did it anyway. Maybe you should be afraid, because you realize, to be afraid, what the stakes are. The question is not whether you are afraid or not. The question is, have you got the guts and the courage to do it anyway? That's the important thing.
I think we have the title for our part 2. So here's a quick rapid fire question. What was the last thing you remember that really gave you a deep belly laugh, and one that made you break down and cry? Those 2 moments recently.
Well, my kids take the piss out of me all the time because I cry at anything on TV now. Now, I'm supposed to be this tough guy who confront Putin, who can handle himself with Gaddafi, but show me a cheesy movie with a dog that dies and I am a mess. And they look at me again, it happens all the time on TV. And it's not even particularly sad stuff. I just find myself in my old age getting more and more emotional. And when we made this movie in America, when we shot it, the emotional roller coaster, man. Every 20 minutes we were feeling it. And as I'm editing the material now during the pandemic, I'm feeling constantly emotional. Like the emotions are right up there again. That's not a bad thing, you know. That's not a bad thing. It just means we're aware of each other. Humanity is a volatile thing, but the worst thing to do is to go through life and not feel it. So I want to feel it. I'm not scared of it. You know, if I reach out with the open hand of friendship and say, offer an open hand to shake someone's hand, and they're an arsehole to me back and they're rude, I'm not going to die. It might hurt my feelings, but I'm not going to die. I can take it. So I'll feel it. But I would rather still be an optimist and try than become so frightened of feeling something that I'll pull back to the corner. I don't want to be that person. It's really hard living that kind of life, but that means it takes courage to keep pushing yourself out there. And every time I pick up the camera, I feel like I'm pushing myself out there again. It would be so much easier to just retreat to the sofa and watch those lovely TV shows. But you've got to face it sometimes, and you've got to step out. And that's what we all do as photographers. The moment you pick up your camera, you're pushing your talent, you're pushing your humanity to get back out there and face it. And sometimes you will laugh and sometimes you will cry. It's okay. Your constitution is a lot stronger than you ever imagined. So do it.
Before I ask you the very last question, I want to read this one thing in the chat that just came in. Although I subscribed for tonight's seminar to learn how to further my photography, I have instead learned how to elevate humanity through photography. This has been a spiritually uplifting seminar. Thank you, Platon, and everyone connected to tonight's seminar, hosts and subscribers.
Thank you. It's only good because you all tuned in.
So my final question to you, on the most personal level and not a definition, what is photography to you?
Bridge building.
There you go. I cannot thank you enough for this wonderful. Honestly, I don't think anyone's had an experience like this. It was inspirational. It was fun. It was moving. I almost cried 17 times. Even right now, I'm at that age too. TV, like, you know, someone singing on American Idol. I'm like, oh, that's beautiful.
Bring it on.
You can't help it. But I look forward to a part 2. This has been amazing. Deb, thanks for helping put this together. SVA, how do people continue their education and knowledge with you?
Please, you can email us or visit our website, sva.edu/CE. And I'll also put my email in the chat if anyone has any questions.
And everybody here that's a photo fan or a professional photographer, APA, American Photographic Artist, is here to support you and give you the tools to be successful in your business. In fact, tomorrow we do so many things behind the scenes. I'm heading up with 2 of my board members, Paul and Jeremy, to Albany to talk on behalf of the Freelancer Isn't Free Act, which is basically, you think, you know, we're guaranteed to get paid, but most of the time we get net 30, net 60, net 90 days with no guarantees on pay. Tomorrow we're going up to fight for a bill where people get paid for within 30 days. So we're there doing stuff that you don't even know behind the scenes. So I want to thank every single one of you. And if you weren't inspired by this, I don't know what will light a fire under your ass. So I thank you so much. And we'll be in Connecticut for our coffee. And thank you for the inspiration. Look for next things. Is there, I know you're an activist now. Where do people go to help or chip in or look more further into what you're doing?
Well, my foundation is called thepeoplesportfolio.org. And you know, that will show you some of the missions we've done. But if you stay tuned, I reckon for the next year and a half, we're about to release some stuff that's really going to shake things up. So I'm not done yet. It's just
better not be. You're not about it. You can kind of like share the torch. You ain't passing it yet.
Not quite yet, but I'm sharing it for sure.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. If you want more information on it, what APA does, it's apanational.org. We're putting that into the chat and all the links to SVA and all that. Thank you so much. This has been one of the best nights of my life. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Everyone,
bye, everybody.
Take care and join us for the next one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good dinner.
Bye. Good night.